Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be talking about the ebook once again. You see, it's really hyped me up. I've actually started thinking about Total War a lot more often, which is great considering that I felt kind of burnt out and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys did too. Now, Yuan Bo is a character that frankly I expected, but not so soon. In fact, most of us were thinking it was going to be Lia Dao the Monkey King, which, yeah, understandable. However, I kind of see why they're not here just yet at this point. Now, the main reason I want to talk about the ebook again is because I've been thinking about it a lot. You see, there is mentions of other factions, other characters, hell, even some Creative Assembly staff were saying look out for some Easter eggs there, so it's very likely that they're hinting at future content. It's something that was well received in the past with obviously the roadmap, and I feel like now they're being a little bit more open with what more or less to expect. Obviously keep in mind that pretty much everything could be subject to change, but I do feel like there's certain things mentioned here which could be fairly curious. One specific quote in page 7 is really interesting to me. In the south, Lia Dao squabbles with the Monkey King over the mountains of heaven, as he has since the dawn of time. To the east, elves from beyond the Jade Sea prey upon the cities of the coast. So very specifically, they're pointing out some current issues with Grand Cathay. There's a few others, but these are the first ones that I want to talk about. Lia Dao and the Monkey King is something that we're expecting eventually. Whether or not we'll see it as a Cathay versus Cathay DLC is currently unknown. First up, it makes sense that the Monkey King wasn't introduced first. While it was a character that I wanted for this specific DLC, the base race of Cathay is not really done just yet, right? So introducing a subculture to it already might be a bit too much, where both factions might start to suffer. So yeah, okay, Yuan Bo makes a lot of sense here. Plus, if they're going to add in Lia Dao or even the Monkey King, I imagine that something like that is going to happen in another form of DLC, which would open up the Mountains of Heaven and possibly even end to include minor factions. Which is why Shadows of Change doesn't really work too well here, considering, well, you know, Tzeentch, Kislev, all of them are kind of far off from the Mountains of Heaven, so I very much agree that we should still expect them, but just not anytime soon. Which honestly is fair. At the end of the day, we know that we're getting a decent amount of content. The last roadmap was pretty damn good, so yeah, I could imagine that a DLC will focus around the Monkey King and possibly someone else, with Lia Dao being an FLC Legendary Lord. Now, yes, we're not getting FLC Legendary Lords for now, it's been moved to Heroes, but you really can't do a Cathay versus Cathay DLC, right? It would be kind of boring. And we do know that Creative Assembly have taken note of people's displeasure at Legendary Heroes taking over the Legendary Lord slots for FLCs, so they could do a one-off every now and then, or maybe, you know, in the perfect world, we'll get a Legendary Lord and a Legendary Hero for free. I think that would determine whatever the price of these new DLCs will go, because I pretty much expect that the new DLC Lord packs, I guess we can still call them Lord packs, will be a bit more expensive than the older forms, because, you know, new Legendary Lords, 20 factions instead of 2, all the usual stuff. The next thing, which is really interesting, is the mention of elves. Now, this could link up to the fact that Lokia has been moved up to Cathay, and he's causing some trouble there, but I imagine that eventually when Ind does open up, they're going to move Lokia there, considering that his items are found in Ind. The very interesting thing here, obviously, is that they say elves, not Druki, Asur, and so on, so why would this be the case? Yes, the Cathayan dragons would be fully aware that there's different types of elves due to diplomacy. We know that diplomacy does happen, so they would have to make a distinction between all the different types of elves. I really do think it's linked up to the fact that we're getting a Slaanesh DLC, and it's likely going to include either the High Elves and the Dark Elves, or the Wood Elves and the Dark Elves. If not, they would specifically mention one of the types of elves. At least that's what makes sense to me. I honestly do think that Creative Assembly are starting to try and hint as much as possible to get everyone hyped up, because yes, interest in Total War and Total War Warhammer's fallen for a little bit, mostly because, well, it kind of linked up to Pharaoh, the radio silence for a while, all the usual stuff, so they're trying to just start getting everyone up and going again. Further to this, in the East, it's actually very curious that they just mention the geographic area and not really mention Yin-yin by name. Yin-yin is the Warden of the East, the Sea Dragon, and this is because I believe that Yin-yin isn't actually in Cathay at the moment. When the fanbase found out that Yin-yin had taken over the original Cathayan lore of the failed invasion of Lustria, they started memeing that maybe she'll go back for round 2 at some point, you know, with the Lizardmen DLC. And I kind of believe that this could happen. The fact is that, well, the dragons do seem a little bit like they would harbor a little bit of a grudge. And it would be kind of nice to have a character based in Lustria, you know, another Cathayan character somewhere, because we're expecting Yuan Bo to be somewhere in Cathay, or as close to Cathay as possible, seeing as he is the administrator. So with Yin-yin having tried and failed to invade Lustria before, why not again now? Go for round 2, and there you go, a little bit of theming. It'll also be the perfect time to introduce a Lizardmen rework, which, let's be honest guys, it's very desperately needed. While the Lizardmen have loads of units and characters and so on to play with, mechanically, they're pretty boring. Now, in page 10, there's another quote that is fairly interesting. It was not the demons approaching Nan-Li that troubled Yuan Bo. This close to the Warpstone Desert and Cathay's border with the uncivilized West, such things would happen. Green-skinned wolf riders from the Hobgoblin Khanates would burn and pillage as far east as Po Mei and the Imperial Road to Wei Jin. Okay, a direct mention of the Hobgoblin Khanates, a faction which a lot of people have kind of been expecting. Some people wanted as an FLC, myself included, during the whole release of the Chaos Dwarves, as it kind of makes sense. It would be using similar rigs, animations, and when it comes to the Wolf Riders themselves, the units too, not the ones on foot, as those are the ones that were found under the free employment of the Chaos Dwarves, if you get what I mean. Now, a faction like this wouldn't really be the largest faction that we'd ever see in Total War Warhammer, mostly because the Hobgoblins are very small in roster. However, as an FLC pack, very similar to Bretonnia, it could work as a, you know, horde-based camp faction, using the camp system of the Ogre Kingdoms but being able to move constantly, very similar to pseudo-hordes in a way, but with its own unique flair. Add in some units and there you go. A bit of a thank you for pretty much supporting the game series with 3 different games, and obviously all the DLC. This series is not cheap. I could see this happening. You see, in Warhammer the Old World, the Hobgoblin Khanates have been getting slight mentions in artwork every now and then. Their logo has been popping up. Many people are starting to speculate that we might see a sub-faction of Hobgoblins through a White Dwarf supplement, maybe. Very similar to how originally Kislev was, or even the Vampire Coast. Now, there's the whole thing of Creative Assembly saying, oh, well, we're not really using Old World content. First up, Creative Assembly could be lying. It's times that they've said no DLC for DLC, for example. And really, the Hobgoblin Khanates aren't exclusive to Old World content. The Hobgoblin Khanates exist in Warhammer Fantasy. And again, I have to remind you that they once said no Vampire Coast, but we did get the Vampire Coast. There's also the fact of, I'm pretty sure Games Workshop and Creative Assembly have to realize that yeah, cross-promotion is going to be very, very important. For Games Workshop, even more so, if they want Old World to succeed, cross-promotion is going to be the best way to generate sales. The interview I had with Rich Aldridge, which claimed no Old World content, was about a month ago. Plans do change. We've known this for a fact. He's actually even said that DLC plans have completely changed as production has started. To be honest, I wouldn't mind this as a paid DLC pack either. It's just one of these things, it would be nice to have mini race packs. I've mentioned this in the past, but it would be cool to get a free thing, considering that we already have some Hobgoblin assets that could be reused for a pretty easy, fast project. One legendary lord, a few number of units, a hero choice, lord choice, have a little fun with it, and there you go. And finally, this last quote, which really made my ears perk up. A vengeful Miao Ying arrived in Nan-Li 5 days after the battle's end. She marched directly from Snakegate, where her armies had been engaged with the ever-belligerent Hung. So this is in page 18. The Hung is another Northman tribe. These are not Norscans like most people see them, despite the fact that we've got Norscan tribes in-game pretty much everywhere. The Hung are fairly different when compared to the Norscans. The Norscans themselves are more like, you know, Norse Vikings in a sense, whereas the Hung are more very similar to the Huns, very similar to the Mongol riders too. They're a nomadic culture, Far Eastern type of humans, hunter-gatherers. It's very interesting that the Hung was specifically mentioned rather than just saying Northmen, which is kind of common. You see, in Total War Warhammer, we have a few Hung tribes in-game, minor factions played by Norscans, the Ungals, the Dreaded Woe, which are inside Cathay, and finally the Hmong. So it's really, really curious. The distinction being made there is something which many people have been asking for, mostly because a lot of us have been asking for a Tribes of the North or Northern Tribes DLC, separating all the Northern tribes, the Hung, the Kurgans, the Norscans, into their own separate sub-factions, something which has been stated since Warhammer 2, but really hasn't been thought possible by the fanbase, more just a dream than anything else. However, the Champions of Chaos DLC did change that, didn't they? We now have the Warriors of Chaos, but separated into their mono-god-style factions. What if Norska was renamed, the faction Norska was renamed to Northern Tribes, and then we ended up getting, well, the separation. Each individual faction being its own thing. Sharing some units, obviously, but with some minor visual changes, so that way the Marauders can be reused, the basic Marauder Horsemen and all that, but then as you get into the higher tier stuff, you start getting some variations, some different looks, some different types of skins, essentially. The fact is, I know some people got a little bit mad about the Warriors of Chaos basically being the reskin DLC, but it did add a lot of flavor, and it now gives you reason to play the Warriors of Chaos 5 times. Warriors Undivided, Warriors of Khorne, Warriors of Sinesh, Warriors of Tzeentch, Warriors of Nurgle. So just imagine it now as Norskins, Hung, Kurgan, Tong, and possibly a united Northman horde, because it kind of makes sense. You know, these ones trying to build up their own empire. It's something that is actually heard of. They'll assimilate all other tribes, that type of situation. It gives us a little bit of different flavor. It gives us different factions. It also fleshes out the world a lot more. Considering the fact that there is lore mentions for all these tribes, there is a decent amount of information regarding some units for one or the other. Extra stuff can just be made up in collaboration with Games Workshop once again, and there you go. I think that this would be freaking cool. Now, I know some people might be saying, oh, more chaos, but, I mean, it's Warhammer 3. We're going to be expecting a lot of chaos, right? This is the big one. We've got monogod factions. It's going to happen. Let's be honest, Norska has been kind of garbage for a while. They tried to fix them up, but it's still not really making them unique. They don't play like a unique thing, so turning it into a Northern Tribe situation, yeah, could probably work. We've seen how Creative Assembly can fix up factions that were just garbage, you know, the Beastmen, the Wood Elves, the Warriors of Chaos. So I would love to see what they'd be able to do in a Norska situation, a faction that desperately needs a DLC, and it looks like Creative Assembly are ignoring until they can't really ignore too much. Yeah, that sounds kind of cruel to say. I imagine that they actually do have some plans, they probably have some ideas, but again, this is something that I could see happening. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but I honestly do think that they're just trying to hint as much as possible here to show that they do actually have proper big plans for Warhammer 3, and it's not just going to get abandoned, because there seems to be people that seem to think that, despite the fact that, you know, Warhammer 3 is their most profitable game right now, it's the one that gets a lot of players, it's the one that gets the most interest. I really do think that this is them just throwing out the bone to people to speculate, to think, oh, what could happen in the future? Again, I could be wrong, but I'm telling you what, I feel hopeful and I feel like I can start speculating again. I feel fairly confident. It's been a while since things have gotten quiet, so now that things are kicking up again, I feel positive, you know, I feel a bit more positive about stuff, and I really want to talk more about Total Warhammer. That's the most important thing for me. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of discussion. I know a lot of you guys have been quite excited about Yuan Bo, so I imagine that you are going to have a little bit of fun with this. Either way, let's see, and, well, have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.